You might remember back in the Switch Complete video course that we talked about the port security feature found on a Cisco Catalyst switch. That could help protect us against a variety of conditions, including a MAC flooding attack. We gave that example. With the MAC flooding attack, we might have an attacker running some software on a laptop that sends a series of frames into our switch, and each frame might claim to be from a different source MAC address. And the switch's MAC address table is only so big, it has a finite size, and after it fills up, it's not able to learn new MAC addresses. And that means when a new PC connects to the switch, its MAC address is not going to be learned because we've had a CAM table overflow. The MAC address table, in other words, has filled to capacity. And what does a switch do when it's trying to send a frame to a MAC address, and that MAC address has not been learned by the switch? Maybe because the MAC address table was full. Well, the switch is going to flood that frame out of all the other switch ports other than the port on which that frame was received. That might allow an attacker connected to the switch to start sniffing those packets going to that PC. And the great news is we can prevent something like that from happening using the port security feature. Port security allows us to specify the maximum number of MAC addresses that are permissible on one of our switch ports. And we could take it a step further. We could say, not only am I only going to allow 1 or 2 MAC addresses, we could specify what those MAC addresses are. We could statically configure the MAC addresses, or we could have those MAC addresses sticky learned, as it's called. Sticky learning allows the switch port to dynamically learn the first MAC address or the first MAC addresses appearing off of that port. And we can say exactly what we're going to do in response to a port security violation. We could say the action is protect, and the protect option is going to drop frames coming from a MAC address that is not allowed. And interestingly, the protect option does not increment the violation counter. The restrict option, as opposed to the protect option, is going to behave similarly. It's going to drop frames from that disallowed MAC address, and it will increment the security violation counter. Another option, a more strict option, is shutdown. The shutdown option says if a violation occurs, we're going to shut down the port, and this might have a negative impact on legitimate users connected to that port. They got shut down for some reason that was out of their control. But that is one approach to port security, and with that review of what port security can do for us, let's talk about some common troubleshooting issues when it comes to port security. It's possible that we've configured the parameters for port security on an interface, however, we haven't enabled it. Maybe we've said you can have a maximum of 2 MAC addresses, and here are those MAC addresses, but if we neglect to enable port security, it's not going to work. Or maybe port security is behaving as expected and we have a trouble ticket where a user cannot communicate on the network. Well, maybe the maximum number of MAC addresses has been reached on the port into which that user is connecting, and we might need to investigate why that is. It could be that we've set up port security to allow a specific MAC address, but a MAC address could be mistyped. Maybe we've misconfigured that MAC address. Or maybe we have a user, they boot up and they're unable to get on the network because some prior violation has caused the port to be shut down. Maybe shutdown was our action in response to a violation. Even if this MAC address is the MAC address that's configured in the switch, and we're saying allow this MAC address, if we say shut down in the event of a violation, even that legitimate MAC address might not be able to get on the network. Now let's go out to a live interface and take a look at some show commands we can use to interrogate our port security configuration. Here on switch SW1, I've configured Fast Ethernet 1/0/2 for port security. Let's see how we can take a quick look at that configuration. We can do a show running-config interface and specify the interface identifier. It's Fast Ethernet 1/0/2. And notice that I am enabled for port security. This is a command we mentioned that might be overlooked. Maybe we do say, here is the MAC address that's going to be permissible off of this port. Don't allow any other MAC address. But if I neglect to say switch port-security, it's not going to take effect. Another command we can use to get some information about our port security configuration is simply show port-security. This tells us what ports are enabled for port security, the maximum number of MAC addresses permissible off of that port, how many MAC addresses we've learned thus far, and what our security violation counter is right now. And our action is to shut down. And another command that we can use to get information about what's going on right now on this port is to say show port-security interface, give the interface identifier, Fast Ethernet 1/0/2 in our case. And we can see what's going on right now. We can see that port security is enabled. And currently the port status is secure shutdown. And you can see that our violation mode is set to shutdown, and currently we are shut down. And here's a final command for you that you might find useful when troubleshooting port security. It's show port-security address. This is going to tell us any MAC addresses that we have statically configured. Here's one that I've statically configured, and you can see that this configured keyword indicates that. However, where it says configured right now, it would say sticky. In other words, the whole thing would say secure sticky if a MAC address had been sticky learned. And that's a collection of show commands that we can use to better understand what's going on with our port security configuration.